Before mapmakers understood what lay beyond the edges of the world, they marked unknown territories with terrifying sea creatures and wrote, "Hic sunt dragones," here be dragons. But why dragons? Why did ancient Chinese emperors, Norse Vikings, Egyptian priests and Aboriginal Australians, people separated by entire oceans and thousands of years, all revere these beasts? Today, we're beginning an exploration into one of the oldest and most well-known creatures in all of world mythology. Welcome to the mysteries of mythology, the origin of dragons. When you hear the word dragon, what do you picture? If you're watching this video, you're likely watching from the US or UK. So you probably imagine a massive creature with 4 legs, enormous bat-like wings, scales covering its body, and fire pouring from its mouth. Maybe you're thinking of something like Smaug from The Hobbit, or the dragons from the Game of Thrones. That's what most of us imagine today. But what's interesting is that the image is relatively modern. The original dragons look nothing like this. They were serpents, giant serpents. No legs or wings, just massive snakes with scales, sometimes sporting the head of another animal, a lion, an antelope, even features that look almost human. And according to new research using statistical phylogenetics, that's the same scientific tools researchers use to trace genetic evolution and figure out where species came from, dragons may be humanity's oldest continuous myth. We're talking about a story that goes back over 75,000 years, all the way to prehistoric Africa. Think about that for a second. 75,000 years. That's not just before written history. That's before civilization itself, before agriculture, before we built cities or invented the wheel. Our ancestors were still living in small groups, hunting and gathering, trying to survive in a world they barely understood. And even that far back, they were already telling stories about dragons. What's bothered historians and mythologists for centuries is how is it possible that cultures with absolutely no contact with each other, from Aboriginal Australians to medieval Europeans to ancient Chinese dynasties, all developed such remarkably similar creatures? They lived thousands of miles apart, separated by mountains, deserts and seas. Yet somehow, they all told stories about giant serpents, connected to water, chaos, and forces of nature. The word dragon itself gives us a clue. It comes from the Greek word drakon, which simply means serpent. And if you trace it even further back, it comes from the Proto-Greek word derkestai, which means to see clearly or to flash or to gleam. Some scholars think this might refer to the serpent's hypnotizing gaze, the way a snake's eyes seem to stare right through you. Or maybe it describes how scales gleam in the sunlight, catching your eye even when the snake is trying to hide. Either way, the dragon has always been about the serpent, the snake. That's where it all began. So why? Why are dragons universal? Why does every culture seem to have independently created the same monster? The answer isn't simple. It's not just one thing. Instead, it's 3 major theories converging together, each explaining a different piece of the puzzle. First, there's evolutionary psychology. The idea that our brains are physically built to fear and remember serpents, thanks to millions of years of evolution. Second, there are ancient human migration patterns. Physical journeys our ancestors took out of Africa, carrying their stories with them as they spread across the entire planet. And third, there are prehistoric geological discoveries, fossils, volcanic eruptions, and strange natural phenomena that seem to confirm the dragon myths people already believed in. All 3 of these theories work together to explain why dragons appear everywhere, in every culture across all of human history. So let's start with the most primal explanation, the one that's literally written into the structure of your brain. The reason why, even if you've never seen a dangerous snake in your life, some part of you still knows to be afraid. In 1977, the famous astronomer and science educator Carl Sagan published a book called The Dragons of Eden. The book was mostly about the origin of human intelligence, but Sagan put forward a fascinating theory about why dragon myths are so widespread. He suggested that human beings might have a memory of giant reptiles buried deep in our brains. Not a memory from our own lives, but a genetic memory, something we inherited from our ancestors who lived millions of years ago, long before the primates even existed. The famous psychologist Carl Jung might have called this collective unconscious, innate memories that an entire species shares from birth. According to this idea, the dragon has lived deep in our minds since the very beginning. We were pre-programmed to fear it before we even knew what it was. Now you might be thinking that sounds a bit far-fetched, and honestly, this theory has caught a lot of criticism over the decades. But modern science has actually backed up part of Sagan's idea. Snakes are one of the oldest predators of mammals on Earth. 66 million years ago, an asteroid hit the Earth and wiped out dinosaurs. That extinction allowed mammals to spread across the planet for the first time. And as they spread, they encountered a predator that had survived extinction: snakes. Especially constrictors. Massive snakes that could wrap around mammals and squeeze the life out of them. For our ancestors, early primates living in trees and on the ground, snakes became the biggest threat to survival. Other mammals could rely on speed to run away, but primates developed something different, something that would change everything. They improved their vision. Primates evolved to see in color and in 3 dimensions, specifically to detect camouflage snakes hiding in their environment. Our entire visual system, the reason you can see the world in full color, the reason you can judge distances and depth, evolved largely because our ancestors needed to spot snakes before the snakes spotted them. Studies have shown that humans can detect snakes faster than we can detect spiders, faster than we can detect any other animal. We can spot a snake even before we're consciously aware of it. Your brain registers snake before you even realize you're looking at one. That works on younger children too. Kids who've never been taught to fear snakes, who have never had a bad experience of one, show them a picture of a snake and their brains light up with attention faster than for almost any other image. Here's another fascinating detail. When there's snakes in your field of vision, your ability to focus on anything else decreases. Part of your attention automatically locks onto the potential predator. Whether you want to or not, it's not a choice, it's hardwired. And there's more. Humans consistently overestimate the size of snakes. This is a known psychological observation. Our perception of distance and size of objects is influenced by how important or threatening we think they are. See a snake and your brain makes it bigger and closer than it actually is. Your mind exaggerates the threat. Now think about what that means for dragon myths. If your brain is already programmed to make snakes seem bigger than they are, and if scary emotional stories are more easily remembered than boring ones, which they absolutely are, then you have all the ingredients for a story about a giant serpent that will never be forgotten. But there's another theory that goes even further. Some researchers believe the Western dragon, specifically the kind with wings, legs and claws, is actually an amalgamation of humanity's 3 greatest prehistoric threats. The serpent representing snakes, the predatory bird representing eagles and other raptors that could swoop down and snatch prey, and the big cat representing lions, tigers, saber-toothed cats, any large predator that could tear you apart. The Western dragon combines all 3 into one ultimate monster. It has the body of a serpent, the wings and claws of an eagle, and often the head or features of a big cat. Add in that deep evolutionary fear of reptiles, that lizard brain memory Carl Sagan talked about, and you get a creature designed to terrify us at the most primal level possible. So when they told stories around the fire at night, and they tried to explain the dangers of the world to their children, Of course, they told stories about giant snakes. Our brains are evolutionarily programmed to fear them, to remember them, to never forget them. But does that explain why myths are so similar? Not quite. Because while our brains might be wired to fear serpents, that doesn't explain the specific stories. It doesn't explain why dragons are almost always connected to water, why they cause storms and floods, why they require sacrifice, why they guard treasures or kidnap princesses. For that, we need to go back in time, way back to South Africa, 75,000 years ago, where the very first dragon story was born. So far, we've looked at how evolution shaped our instinctive fear of serpents, but fear alone doesn't explain why every culture created such vivid, detailed dragon myths, or why they took different forms around the world. To answer that, we need to look beneath the ground itself, because sometimes the earth seemed to provide proof that dragons were real. Geomythology is the study of connections between myths and the geology of the region they were originated from. Geomythology is based on a simple but powerful idea. Myths and legends aren't just fiction, they also preserve records of the past. They contain insights into how our ancestors understood the natural world based on what they actually saw and experienced. And geomythology has led to some genuine scientific discoveries. In Australia, researchers followed clues from an ancient indigenous Dreamtime legend from the Arunti people that described a star falling into a waterhole. By taking the story seriously and investigating the location, they found a previously uncharted meteor impact site near Palm Valley in the Finca Gorge National Park. In Hawaii, stories about Pele, the volcano goddess, led scientists to recalibrate their understanding of when Kilauea volcano first collapsed. They'd gotten the timeline wrong. The myths helped them correct it. So what about dragons? What physical evidence might have reinforced these myths? Let's start with the most common that most know about: fossils. There's a Greek myth about a hero named Cadmus who defeated a fierce water dragon. After killing it, he pulled out its jagged teeth and sowed them in the soil like seeds. Scattered abundantly across Europe, you'll find mastodon remains, including their large pointy molars. These teeth are huge, sharp, and if you didn't know what a mastodon was, they'd look an awful lot like the teeth of a monster. Some scholars believe that ancient Greek storytellers crafted the tale of Cadmus after digging up these fossils. The jagged teeth weren't from a dragon, they were from a prehistoric elephant. But to people who'd never seen or heard of a mastodon, what else would they think? Paleontologists have found mastodon bones on the Greek island of Chios, an island that in ancient times was said to have been terrorized by a jagged-toothed dragon. Coincidence? Probably not. And here's what makes this even more compelling. The physical features of dragons from different regions often mirror the fossils found in specific areas. In northern China, fossilized Pliocene deer skulls are commonly found. These ancient deer had enormous antlers. And what do Chinese dragons have? Antlers. Large branching antlers that look nothing like what you would expect in a serpent. In the Siwalik hills of Pakistan, there are legends of dragons with jeweled crests, sparkling crystals on their heads. In that same region, fossils are frequently found with calcite crystals embedded on them. One example is Civatherium, an extinct species of giraffe. Dig up one of those skulls with crystals glinting on its bone and you might very well think you'd found a dragon with a jeweled crest. Different fossils in different places lead to different dragon features. It's like each culture was building their dragon based on the combination of the myth they'd inherited and the physical evidence they stumbled across. But fossils aren't the only geological feature that influenced dragon myths. Fire-breathing dragons might have been inspired by geothermic activity, volcanoes, hot springs, and natural gas vents. Take the chimera from Greek mythology. It was a hybrid creature, part lion, part goat, part dragon, and it breathed fire. According to the legend, the hero, Bellerophon, killed it by shoving a block of lead down its throat, choking on its own flames. The creature supposedly came from what's now southern Turkey, and guess what's in southern Turkey? Natural gas vents that shoot fire out of the ground. Even today you can visit these vents and see flames erupting from cracks in the earth. To ancient people, this would have looked exactly like a fire-breathing monster living underground. Similarly, in western Turkey, there are landscapes that look scorched and burnt, the result of ancient volcanic activity. Greek myths say this land was charred during the epic battle between Zeus and Typhon, a 100-headed dragon. Some versions of the story claim the land itself was scorched by Zeus's lightning bolts during their deadly duel. Volcanic landscapes provided the perfect evidence that these battles had actually happened. And here's a practical modern example of how dragon myths and fossils are still connected. In China, paleontologists often plan their dinosaur digs in regions that were well known for dragon bone deposits. For centuries, Chinese people found large fossils and assumed they were dragon bones. They collected them, sometimes ground them up for traditional medicine, and passed down stories about where to find more. Modern scientists realized these dragon bone locations were actually rich fossil sites. One of the best places in the world for finding dinosaur tracks is called Huanglonggao, which I'm sure I've pronounced incorrectly, but it translates into Yellow Dragon Valley. Different regions had different fossils and different geological features, which is why Chinese dragons look different from European dragons, which look different from Mesoamerican feathered serpents. But they all came from the same source, the same ancient story, just adapted to fit the physical world each culture experienced. So dragons aren't purely imaginary, and they're not purely real. They're a blend, ancient fear meeting ancient evidence, humanity's oldest story reinforced by the planet beneath our feet. We've seen how our fear of dragons comes from millions of years of evolution, and how fossils and volcanoes made that fear feel real. But the science only explains why dragons feel believable, not where the first dragon story came from. We all know what the dragon is. A giant serpent-like creature able to fly and the power to destroy worlds or save them in an instant. But what if we could trace them back to one single story? No other creature is as widely known as the dragon, so where did this myth begin? What was the first dragon? In this video, the second part of our dragon series will continue our journey to find why everyone has heard of the dragon and where it all started. Welcome to the mysteries of mythology, the origin of dragons. Researchers like Julian Dewey asked detailed questions like what dragons look like, where they lived, what powers they had, and built a mythological family tree to compare them. So what did they find? Their analysis suggested something really interesting. The theory is that dragon myths could go back as far as 75,000 years ago, before humans began their migration across the world. It's a heavily debated idea, and not all scholars accept the methodology, but it gives us a starting point to explore what the original dragon might have looked like. In the Lesotho region of southern Africa, European explorers in the 1800s documented an interesting encounter. They found ancient rock art in caves, paintings that showed hunters with large animals. The men who first saw them thought they were looking at hippopotamuses or maybe rhinoceroses. And to be fair, so did I when I saw them. But the local sand person corrected them. Those were apparently snakes, more specifically water snakes, sometimes called rain snakes or cave snakes. The animals in the paintings had 4 legs. They looked nothing like snakes, but the sand elder insisted that they were snakes. These were sacred rain animals, creatures believed to live in the rivers and caves, controlling when the rains would come. The scene seemed to be happening underwater in the spirit world. The paintings showed men in trance-like states, dancing, clapping their hands, and their noses were bleeding. And there, among them, was a giant serpent. The explorers wrote that their head alone was 3 or 4 times the size of human figures. Some of the humans were spirits of men who had died and now lived in those rivers. Others were alive, performing the ritual. The men held reins, long leather reins made of oxhide, and there were lines all over the snake's body representing cuts. To outsiders it looked like a hunt, but to the San, it was a rain-making ritual. The rain snake wasn't hunted, it was called, charmed, and cut to bring rain to the people. And there's a logical reason for this belief. Snakes in the region spent the winter in semi-hibernation, hidden underground or in caves. Then in the spring, right when the seasonal rains arrived, the snakes would emerge. To the ancient humans, snakes and rain appeared at the same time. To them, the snakes brought the rain. Other rock art from southern Africa backs this up. Some paintings even show the snakes itself having a nosebleed, connecting it directly to the trance ritual. Now, the same ritual shows up 20,000 years later, thousands of miles away. In two French Pyrenean caves, Montspan and Touc d'Audubert, archaeologists found headless snake skeletons dating to the Magdalenian period, roughly 17 to 12,000 years ago. The skeletons were found at the back of the caves, in places snakes would never naturally reach. The bodies were intact, so they weren't dragged there by predators. The heads had been deliberately removed. This looks remarkably similar to the African ritual. Cutting or removing parts of a serpent in a ritual context appears to have travelled from Africa to Ice Age Europe. So from all this evidence, the rock art, the interviews, the archaeological finds, and the statistical analysis, scientists believe they could piece together what the original African proto-dragon looked like. A giant, scaly snake with a single head. Sometimes it had features from other animals, the head of a lion, the ears and horns of an antelope, even human hair. It was aggressive and dangerous, but it could be controlled through ritual, and it was fundamentally connected to rain, water, and forces that help crops grow and people survive. This was the first dragon, the original serpent, the creature that would over the next 75,000 years spread to every corner of the planet and transform into 1,000 different forms. And wherever people travelled, they brought their stories with them. 65,000 years ago, humans began leaving Africa in waves, searching for new resources, lands, and better opportunities. And as they travelled, they carried everything with them, including their myths. For 50,000 years, the myths travelled with them. It reached China and then pushed north into Siberia. Then, during the Ice Age, human population pushed into multiple directions, crossing into North America through the Bering Land Bridge and spreading south from China to Oceania. Australia's an interesting case. People reached the continent perhaps 50 to 65,000 years ago, but we can't definitively date when the specific myths arrived or developed there. The Australian rainbow serpent traditions are ancient, and with associated rock art often dated between 6,000 and 8,000 years ago, though the stories themselves could be much older. We simply don't have the tools to trace oral traditions that far back with certainty. That's why the Aboriginal Australian rainbow serpent myths are probably closer to 10,000 years old, not the 30 or 50,000 some people claim. Mesoamerica developed its own serpent traditions independently. The feathered serpents appear in archaeological record much later. Earliest major examples at Teotihuacan around 150 to 250 CE, later becoming known as Quetzalcoatl among the Aztecs. Whether this connects to older serpent myths from elsewhere or developed separately remains unclear. Serpent and dragon-like beings appear across many cultures worldwide, though their timelines and their origins differ. Some may share ancient connections through human migrations. Others may have developed independently as humans across the world encountered real snakes and wove them into their mythology. As human populations spread into East Asia tens of thousands of years ago, the dragon myth spread further. In China, serpent and long mythology, often translated as dragon, took deep root. The dragon stayed close to what might have been the original concept, a helper of people and bringer of life-giving rain. The oldest physical evidence of Chinese dragons appears in the Neolithic site called Shishuipo. dating back about 6 to 6,500 years ago. But the myths themselves likely arrived much earlier, passed down orally through countless generations. According to one Chinese myth, long ago the earth had no rivers or lakes, only the vast eastern sea where 4 dragons lived. The long dragon, the yellow dragon, the black dragon, and the pearl dragon. One day the dragons looked down from the clouds and saw people on the ground crying for rain. Their crops had withered, their children were starving. The dragons felt pity for them, but they knew they could not make the rain themselves. Only the Jade Emperor held that power. So they soared up to the heavenly palace to beg for his help. The Jade Emperor barely listened. He waved them away, promising he would send rain the next day. But days passed, then 10, and still no rain came. On the ground, people chewed bark and clay to keep hunger away. The dragons watched in sorrow and anger, realizing the Jade Emperor had no intention of helping. So they made their own plan. They flew back to the eastern sea, filled their mouths with water, and released it over the dry land like rain. The people rejoiced. Crops sprang to life. Rivers ran through the valleys for the first time. When the Jade Emperor saw what they had done, he was enraged. "How dare these dragons act without my command?" he thundered. He ordered the mountain god to punish them. The mountain god hurled down 4 great mountains, one upon each dragon, trapping them beneath the earth. Yet the dragons did not regret their defiance. Even as they lay buried, they continued to release the water they had carried, letting it flow through the land as rivers. And so the 4 dragons became the 4 great rivers of China. The Heilongjiang in the north, the Huanghu in the center, the Yangtze in the south, and the Zhujiang in the far north. I struggled to pronounce those, so if anyone's from China, please let me know in the comments how I did. To this day, people say that when the rain falls gently on the land, it is the dragons breathing gently in the mountains, still keeping their promise to humanity. As the dragon myth continued spreading, moving back towards the Near East and up into Siberia around 50,000 years ago, something changed. The dragon started losing some of its features. It became more snake-like, and it shifted from being benevolent to being aggressive, the villain in myths rather than the hero. The dragon changed wherever it landed. Desert people saw it differently than river people. Mountain cultures told different stories than coastal ones. Then came one more major shift. Around 8,000 years ago, the Proto-Indo-European language culture developed, and over the next few thousand years, it spread like wildfire from Europe into India, across parts of West Asia, and even back into North Africa, especially around the Nile. The Indo-Europeans brought their own version of the dragon story, and this version had a distinctive feature: cattle stealing. In this version of the myth, the hero's job was to get the cattle back, a conflict that reflected the real-world importance of herds to the pastoral peoples. Over time, the cattle raid evolved into princess kidnapping. The exact reason for this shift aren't entirely clear, but it became one of the most enduring dragon tropes in Western mythology. The Indo-European expansion also brought the concept of Drakenkampf, the struggle against dragons. The idea that dragons represented chaos and heroes represented order, and the two must battle to the death. This version spread across most of Europe, India, and West Asia, though interestingly there were exceptions. As time went on, the European dragon changed even more. It went from a many-headed serpent to a single-headed beast, and around the 15th century, European illustrations started showing dragons with 4 legs instead of none. This is when we start seeing the classic medieval dragon we think of today. The British Isles even started distinguishing between different types. 4-legged dragons were called dragons, 2-legged dragons were called wyverns. Both showed up on battle flags, family crests and banners. The Welsh flag still has a red dragon on it to this day. But knowing all of this, there's still an interesting question. Why did the myths split so dramatically between East and West? why did dragons stay good in China but become evil in Europe? To answer that, we need to look at what dragons represented. Dragons weren't just monsters. They were fundamental forces of the universe, forces that held reality together or threatened to tear it apart. The Norse world serpent Jormungandr was one of Loki's children, and Loki's children were never normal. When Odin discovered the infant serpent, he was horrified. He grabbed the baby Jormungandr and hurled it into the ocean, hoping to be rid of it forever. But Jormungandr didn't die. Instead, it grew. It grew so much that eventually it became so massive that it encircled the entire ocean of Midgard, the human world, and bit down on its own tail, creating an Ouroboros. The Ouroboros, a serpent eating its tail, represented the eternal cycle, but it also represented a boundary. The circle of order inside, protected from the chaos outside. As long as Jormungandr holds its tail in its mouth, the world is safe. But Norse mythology tells us one day during Ragnarok, the end of the world, Jormungandr will let go. The serpent will release its tail, the boundary will shatter, and chaos will consume nearly everything. After Ragnarok, a new world will be reborn from the sea, continuing the cycle. The dragon isn't just a monster, it's a guardian of the cycle itself. In Egyptian mythology, there was a concept and goddess called Ma'at, which meant order, truth, balance, everything functioning as it should. And naturally there was an opposite, Isfet, which meant chaos. Chaos has a physical form, a giant serpent named Apep, sometimes called Apophis. Every single night, the sun god Ra would sail his solar barge through the underworld, travelling from sunset to dawn. But the journey was dangerous because every night Apep attacked. The giant serpent tried to destroy Ra's boat and plunge the world into a permanent darkness. The coffin text described Apep as an evil dragon with a hypnotizing stare. If you remember from the previous episode, the Proto-Greek word derkesthai, to see clearly, to flash, to gleam. This shows up again and again in dragon myths. Egyptian priests took this threat seriously. They performed daily rituals and sang hymns to help Ra on his journey. Some rituals were specifically designed to ward off the evil eye of Apep. Storms and eclipses were believed to be Apep's temporary victories, but in the end Ra always emerged victorious at dawn. Ma'at, order, always triumphed. But Apep was never destroyed. He lost every night, but came back the next night, and the night after that, forever. Chaos was a permanent part of existence. You couldn't eliminate it, you could only hold it back. Norse mythology had one other famous dragon. At the base of Yggdrasil, the world tree that holds all of reality together, there's a place called Nastrond, the corpse shore, located in hell. This is where the souls of the worst criminals go, murderers, adulterers, oathbreakers, and people who don't like and comment on this video. And there, gnawing constantly at the roots of Yggdrasil, is Nithhogr. Scholars debate exactly what he's trying to do. Some think Nithhogr is trapped in the roots and trying to escape. Others think it's actively attacking the roots, trying to destroy the world tree itself, and therefore all life and creation that the tree supports. Either way, Nithhogr is a creature of decay and chaos, constantly threatening the entire cosmos, just like Apep and Jormungandr. Now let's look at one more example, one that might surprise you. The serpent in the Garden of Eden. Most people think the serpent as Satan, the devil, but this is a modern version of the story. The original story wasn't meant to portray the serpent as Satan, it was just a serpent, a clever talking one. After Eve eats the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, God curses the serpent. And one part of this curse is that the serpent will crawl on its belly from that day forward, which means before the curse, it didn't crawl on its belly. So what did it look like? We don't know for sure, but some Christian art shows the serpent with more dragon-like appearance, legs and more upright posture, features that look less like a simple snake. And later in the book of Revelation, Satan is explicitly called the Great Red Dragon. So the connection between the serpents, dragons, and cosmic evil became deeply embedded in Christian thought. The serpent is responsible for both enlightenment and suffering. It gives humans knowledge, the ability to understand good and evil, to think for themselves, to be aware. But that knowledge comes at a cost. Shame, pain, hardship, and death. The story suggests that knowledge and suffering are intertwined. You can't have one without the other. Many ancient civilizations incorporated chaos into their understanding of the world. The Mesopotamians knew their floods were devastating, but floods also brought fish and fertile soil. You couldn't have one without the other. The idea was chaos is going to happen. Get ready for it. Respect it. Understand that it's part of the natural order. Christianity arrived in Europe with a different idea, that chaos could be destroyed and should be. The dragon stopped being a natural force and became pure evil. It became something to be defeated. And that's when the Dragon Slayer was born. In China, if you called someone a dragon, you'll be giving them the highest compliment imaginable. In medieval Europe, if you called someone a dragon, you were calling them a monster that deserved to die. But in both these traditions, there was always someone or something hunting dragons. But why? Welcome back, mystics, to this third and final part of the Dragon Origin series. First we go to Asia. In Chinese myth, the Long was an evil. It was rain, rivers, clouds, and thunder, the breath of the world itself. To farmers, dragons meant life. Too much rain or too little and the entire community suffered. So people didn't generally hunt dragons, they prayed to them. There were 4 dragon kings, each ruling a sea and controlling the flow of rain and water. When crops withered, people begged the dragon kings for mercy. And when floods destroyed their homes, they built temples to calm their anger. The Emperor of China himself was called the true dragon son of heaven. His throne was the dragon throne. To harm a dragon was to threaten the cosmic order and the harmony between heaven, earth, and humanity. So in a world where dragons represented the divine balance, you'd think that dragons were never slayed, but they were. Nejia, the fiery child god from Investiture of the Gods, famously killed Al Bing, the 3rd son of the Dragon King of the Eastern Sea. But he didn't do it for glory, he did it in self-defense. Al Bing was flooding Nejia's village after Nejia accidentally disturbed the sea. And when Nejia realized he'd angered the Dragon King, he sacrificed himself to atone. But he was later reborn as the protector of the people, and even of the dragons themselves. Then there's Hu Yi, best known for shooting down the 9 suns to save the earth from burning. But legends also say he slew a hydra-like dragon called Zhao Ying that was poisoning rivers. Again, not because dragons were evil, but because one of them had gone rogue, disturbing the natural balance. Even gods sometimes fought dragons. Ulang Shen, the 3-eyed warrior deity, defeated a river dragon that demanded human sacrifice, then spared its life once order was restored. In the East, the dragon or Long wasn't a monster. But once in a while, when a dragon went too far, a hero had to step up in order to restore balance. This worldview runs through nearly every Eastern philosophy. In Taoism, balance between yin and yang sustains the universe. In Confucianism, harmony between heaven, earth, and humankind defines a just society. And in Buddhism, dragons even become protectors of sacred teachings, guardians of wisdom itself. So while you think Asian dragon slayers can only be found in the worlds of PlayStation and Xbox, they were also found in traditional Chinese mythology. While Eastern cultures were only occasionally dealing with a few wayward dragons, medieval Christian Europe was doing the exact opposite. The story of St. George is perhaps the best known example. A dragon was terrorizing a village in Roman times, a place called Silene, believed to be in modern-day Turkey or Libya. The venomous creature lived in a nearby pond and was poisoning the countryside. To protect the city, the villagers began offering it sacrifices. First 2 sheep a day, then a man and sheep, and finally their own children chosen by a lottery. For years, families offered their children in this way. Then one year, the lottery chose the princess. The king refused to give up his daughter, but the villagers were outraged. They had all lost children themselves, so why should the king's daughter be spared? Furious and desperate, they dragged her to the dragon's lair. In most versions of the story, the princess is depicted as brave. She goes willingly, resigned to her fate and accepting that this is simply how things must be done. Some scholars see this as a reflection of older mythological traditions that centered on the goddesses, the earth, and sacrifice as part of the natural cycle. As the princess waits by the water, Saint George, a Roman soldier and devout Christian, rides by. Seeing her distressed like a bride and awaiting death, he immediately offers to save her. She refuses, telling him to leave. "This is the way of things here," she says. "The dragon must be fed, or the others will suffer." George cannot bring himself to abandon her. When the dragon emerges from the pond, he charges forward on horseback and drives his lance deep into its side, wounding it severely. Then he asks the princess to throw him her girdle, the belt worn around her waist as a symbol of chastity and protection. As soon as George ties the girdle around the dragon's neck, the creature becomes completely tame. It follows him quietly like a pet. George leads the dragon and the princess back to the village, where he offers the people a choice. He will slay the dragon if everyone agrees to convert to Christianity. They accept without hesitation, and the dragon is killed. Now compare that to Saint Martha and the Tarasque in medieval France. The Tarasque was terrorizing the region of Provence. Legend said it was the spawn of the biblical Leviathan. It had a lion's head, 6 legs, a snake-like tail, and a turtle-like armored shell. It breathed poison, and all attempts to kill it had failed. Until Saint Martha, a young devout Christian woman, ventured alone into the forest, found it feeding on a shepherd it had just killed, and caught it distracted. As it began to turn on her, she held out her crucifix and sprinkled holy water on it. The Tarasque instantly laid down at her feet like a trained dog. Martha crafted a leash from her own hair, just like the princess girdle in the St. George story, and led it back to town. She had no intention of killing it. She wanted to show the people that God's power could pacify even the most savage beasts. The dragon didn't need to die, but the moment the townspeople saw the Tarasque, docile, harmless, on a leash, they grabbed stones, sticks, farm tools, and beat the creature to death right there in the street. Even the saint didn't want it dead, but people's fear and the need for revenge were too strong. Some scholars say there is symbolism in the stories. In Western belief, humanity should be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over every living thing. The belief is that you should subdue the earth, have dominion over it, and be its master. Contrast that with Buddhism, Hinduism, and many Native American and Mesoamerican traditions where the earth and everything on it are sacred, parts of a cycle to be respected. In medieval Europe, chaos wasn't acceptable. Nature had to be conquered. And the dragon, representing untamed nature, old pagan beliefs, everything civilization needed to overcome, had to die. The dragon slayer became the ultimate hero because he was doing what Christianity demanded, destroying chaos, not coexisting with it. So after 75,000 years of storytelling, from the rain snakes of Africa to the dragons of China and Europe, why did this creature appear everywhere? Because everything lined up so perfectly. It was the perfect storm. Our minds were built to notice serpents. Our ancestors carried one unforgettable story out of Africa, and the earth itself with its fossils, flames and storms seemed to prove the story true. Everywhere humans went, dragons followed, and every culture shaped them in its own image. In the East, dragons ruled the skies and brought the rain, symbols of balance, wisdom and life. In the West, they became chaos incarnate, monsters to be slain, not understood. Two sides of the same truth. Do we see ourselves as part of nature, or as its conqueror? In the end, dragons aren't imaginary, and they aren't real. They're reflections of us, of our fears of chaos, our respect of nature, our need to understand the unknown. And that's why they've never gone away from our minds, why we still draw them, dream them, and bring them to life on screen. Because the dragon is more than a myth. It's the oldest story we still tell, the mirror that shows who we are and what we are afraid of the most. Hic sunt dracones, here be dragons, and here at the edge of the map is where the human story really began. So what do you think, mystics? Are dragons our oldest fear or our oldest teacher? Were dragon slayers heroes, or did they destroy something sacred? Let me know what you think in the comments. I tried to read every one. And if you journeyed with me through all 3 parts of this series, thank you. Truly. It means more than I can say. If you'd like to keep exploring the ancient stories that shape how we see the world, make sure you've subscribed and leave a like to help other mystics find their way here.